Well, here we are in Glasgow, a city that's known internationally for many things. It's known for Charles Rennie Mackintosh, for heavy engineering, for bad health, shopping now. But maybe it should be better known as the city where Adam Smith did much of his finest work. Smith was born in Kirkcaldy, but he came to Glasgow when he was 14 to study at the university, and then 10 years after he graduated, he came back to take up a lectureship here. And it was in this city that he wrote A Theory of Moral Sentiments, and he also did much of the research for that great Bible of economics, The Wealth of Nations. Now, many detect a bit of a split in Smith's thinking between the morality of a theory of moral sentiments and the competition and free market focus of The Wealth of Nations. But one thing unites both works, and it's Smith's concern for the poor. If you look at The Wealth of Nations, you'll see that Smith wanted the country to become richer because he thought it was the poor who would particularly benefit. And he wasn't just interested in the poor having more money so that they could have more food or better accommodation. He wanted the poor to live without shame, as he put it. And he gave the example of a day labourer having a linen shirt so that he could go out into society and not feel ashamed. The other thing that's surprising, I think, about Adam Smith, because of what we know about The Wealth of Nations, is that he was actually very judgmental about how people may spend their money. He had no time for the idea that people would be spending their money on ornaments of dress, trinkets, fine furniture or jewellery. Smith actually considered spending money in that way as showing a base and selfish disposition. Now, just let's pause for a minute and think, if Adam Smith came and was with us in today's world, what would he make of the values that now dominate within our culture? Would he not consider it base? Now, in my talk, I'm not going to use the term base values. I'm going to talk about materialism and materialist values. And I'm very deliberately using the work of an American psychologist called Professor Tim Kasser. And he's written a book called The High Price of Materialism. Now, what Kasser is saying is, think of materialism as being made up of three different elements: money and what it can buy, appearance and image, and thirdly, fame, popularity, status, power. What is absolutely critical and what holds these materialist values together is very much how we're seen through the eyes of other people. Now, of course, it's the case that human beings live in a material world and we're always going to care about these values. Money is about resources. It's about keeping body and soul together. Of course, we're going to care about our appearance. I'm not disputing that. Appearance is about sexual attractiveness. It's about mating. It's about how we present ourselves to other people. And of course, we're going to care about what they think of us because we are very, very social animals. The issue that's at stake here is how much these values have come to dominate our lives, completely dominate. They are beginning to trump everything else. Now, what do I mean by values? Well, there's lots of things that we could be paying attention to as human beings: relationships, caring, meaning, community, service, duty, spirituality, learning, development, fairness, equality, tradition, contact with nature. These are all things that we can and do care about and that we can pay quite a lot of attention to. The problem is that although people are doing that, clearly they're doing that, their attention is continually being drawn to the importance of these materialist values. And we're getting this from the media, we're getting it from television. I mean, just bear in mind that your average Briton is watching television for 4 hours a day. It's actually 5 hours in Scotland. It's said that young people, teenage years, are spending 7 hours a day on screens. Collectively in Britain, we're watching 2.7 billion commercial adverts a day. So, what does this look like? Well, it looks like parents who now believe that the most important thing that they have to do for their children is buy them things. This is a particularly UK virulent phenomenon. Parents obsessed by brands for their children. No wonder we have the worst well-being of our children out of 20 OECD countries. We're talking about people with very little money who are going and spending £90 on a pair of leather baby booties because that's what they think they have to do to live without shame. It's about make-up parties for 3-year-old children. It's about, girls before they go to college in the morning spending 3 hours on their makeup because they are now so obsessed by their appearance. Now, this might be an advertiser's paradise, but it's bad for well-being. It detracts from what really does make for a good life, and that's meaning and purpose, it's relationships, it's spirituality, it's being outdoors and being active. These are the kind of things that matter, and yet we are not getting these messages enough. And if you question this at all, just look at the celebrities. The ones that have the best lives are the ones who are doing charity work. They're ambassadors for good causes because they know and they feel that they cannot have good lives on the basis of celebrity values. Now, I'm not just interested in individual well-being. I'm also very interested in collective well-being. And I think we can lay at the door of materialism a lot of the big problems of our time. This is based on the work of Danny Dorling, who's a social geographer. He's written a book called Injustice, and it's looking at income inequality in the UK from the period 1918 to 2005. And I'm not going to go into it in a great deal of depth, but what it shows is from about 1918 to 1979, Britain became fairer as a result of government policies and taxation regimes. From 1979 onwards, that has gone in the opposite direction, and we're now back, according to Dorling, at levels of inequality that applied in Britain in 1854 when Dickens was writing Hard Times. And why would we not expect this in a country that's actually much more about me first, greed and money than it is about fairness? We shouldn't be surprised by the debt that we have collectively as we try to fix a lot of the problems that are arising as a result of the inequality, the social dysfunction that we now have, and the personal debt as people who are paid really quite small sums of money but have got all that advertising to contend with are trying to make the best of their lives, and the only way they can often do it is through debt. We shouldn't be surprised when the people at the top of our organisations are often paying themselves huge sums of money and large bonuses, because that is in tune with the values of our age. Nor should we be surprised when we get headlines like this from The Guardian last week as a result of a turn of affairs at the Levinson inquiry into the conduct of the media. Britain was once a country that prided itself on its standards, and yet we now have a growing issue with standards in public life. And of course, there's then the environmental challenges. This isn't just a British phenomenon. I'm not trying to say it is. It's just we've got a particularly toxic amount, I think, of materialism within Britain. But any society and any culture that thinks that a good life is about buying stuff and buying new stuff is going to have problems with an overuse of an overuse of resources and environmental degradation. Now, where are these values coming from? Well, everywhere, and that's the scary part of this, not just the media. We're also getting them from politicians who now really act like business people in many ways by having focus groups, by courting the voters and saying, tell us what you want and we'll try and give it to you and your aspirational family, rather than having the notion of the good society and what can we do to make the country better or fairer. No, we now have consumer politics. We're also getting it strangely from the big charities, and the big charities are now becoming aware of this, that they actually haven't been doing very much to challenge these values. They're using a lot of these values to try and get your money for good causes. If you've ever been to a big charity dinner, you will see the values of celebrity culture writ large. I gave money to a campaign that one of the big charities was running for poverty of children in the third world. And I was plagued by a series of emails over a period which said, Carol, we think you're special. In other words, narcissistic individualism, but attached to a good cause. Now, I could go on, There's many other unlikely conduits for these values. But I'm not despondent. I'm really not despondent, because I think as human beings, we understand this. I've been giving a number of talks on this. People get it. I remember a couple of years ago, I was working with some factory workers and some office workers. And at one point I said to them, why do you think that there's been a big rise in depression? And of course they said, we've changed the definition and so on, and they're right about that. But just about everyone said a version of, because you're never good enough, you never have enough, and you never get there. And what I find is ordinary people understand this, but there is no leadership for it, very little leadership for it at the moment. So what we have to do is we've got to start leading on this agenda ourselves. Don't wait for the politicians. They're too fear in many ways. They're too, fear of what the media would say. They're too focused on short-term electoral success to be thinking long-term. We've got to be doing this for ourselves. So what's my big idea? Well, my big idea is that we've got to wake up and get clued up on what's happening. We're not talking about this enough. We've got to start turning the TV off and protecting ourselves more against these values. We've got to invest time and energy in the things that really do make for a good life. We've got to get the topic on our organisations and start talking about it with our colleagues. We've got to talk about it with our friends in the pub or when we're out for dinner. And we've particularly got to talk to our children about it and to other parents, whether it's at parents' nights or getting our children's parents to come. Because we've always got to say keys. We've got to stop this madness in many ways and start doing something different. And I think parents particularly are very worried about the unwholesome values that their children are growing up with. Let me just go back to the Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment, the idea was really about shining the light in dark places. And for the Enlightenment scholars like Smith, what they wanted to root out was some of what they saw as the evils of their day. And that was irrationality, it was superstition, and it was religious fanaticism. I think we need a similar project of enlightenment. We need to shine the light into dark places. And these dark places are these toxic base values, as Smith would call them, that are undermining our environment, destroying our environment, and they're diminishing all our lives. Thank you very much.